What is up, guys? Welcome back to the pod. We are back here after a very busy week last week. Today is our regularly scheduled show, if you want to call it that, in regards to a recap of the week that was in pro wrestling. I'm not going to get into a lot of specifics that has happened in regards to the big stories like Vince McMahon and things like that. If you're looking for my thoughts on that, I released a specific show on that this past week. I believe it was on Thursday, right after the news broke, and of course on Jeff Hardy prior to that with his latest DUI arrest, sadly, and Tony Khan's addressing of his future that led into Dynamite of this past week. Things of that, and then we of course spoke on the big breaking news after Vince McMahon's initial investigation news that was broke by the Wall Street Journal on him stepping back and Stephanie McMahon stepping up, and of course Brock Lesnar returning. As I was recording the show on Friday, I was watching SmackDown, and as I was recording, Brock Lesnar made his return, so we touched on that a little bit on Friday, but I will definitely get into that a little bit more here, as I have a few thoughts about his return, the announcement that was made right after the show ended on Friday, and things of that nature. So just a quick recap and a heads up on that if you're looking for more of my thoughts on that specifically, or on those topics rather specifically. But with that being said, we will get right into the show here today. And staying on the Vince McMahon Stephanie WWE drama topic, there was a report by Fightful.com, specifically Sean Ross Sapp, so shout out to him again, who I seem to be going to for a lot of news, so shout out to them for all the work they do over there. They are a great follow on Twitter, and obviously a great source website-wise and legitimacy-wise. They seem to be one of the more respected nowadays in the wrestling, I don't want to say dirty world, but in the wrestling news and wrestling journalism world out there, so shout out to them, guys, and if you haven't checked them out, I would definitely recommend doing so. And side note, I will say I love the layout of their website as well and how organized everything is, so just kudos to them. But Sean had released a report regarding more on Stephanie McMahon leaving WWE and rumors of Vince McMahon pushing her out. This obviously was prior to her resuming, or not necessarily resuming, but taking his position as interim CEO and chairwoman of WWE. So obviously, I don't even think that was a month ago. I should have checked the date. Maybe he'll reference it here. But I meant to write it down. But it hasn't even been, I don't think, a month yet since Stephanie McMahon had stepped aside herself and to kind of focus on what she had stated was her family, of course, Triple H's health issues and things of that nature, and just kind of needing a break. Obviously, that took a complete 180 turn for her, so again, I hope she's good. I hope Triple H is good. I hope her family is good. And it was just more of a break to kind of collect herself, and at least she got a couple weeks, which I'm sure is obviously not what she was originally intending on. But moving on to the report itself, Sean Ross Sapp stated, quote, "A couple of weeks after stepping away from WWE, Stephanie McMahon is still the subject of headlines as she's now back as interim CEO. We've learned more behind that initial absence, as it was incorrectly rumored that Vince McMahon pushed her out. As a Business Insider report had indicated that Vince McMahon had pushed Stephanie McMahon out when she took her leave of absence in May," so there we go with the date, or specifically, or at least a more conclusive idea of the time frame. He went on to say, however, we can confirm that those that were involved with WWE ahead of the Nick Khan regime were letting people know that that wasn't the case even before the news dropped. However, some hires in the new regime were quick to say that there were performance issues and things to improve on, but not along the lines that it was something that caused the end of her job. Sources from both regimes state that the decision was hers. The recent story from Wall Street Journal that the WWE board has been investigating Vince McMahon since April lends credibility to that, as Stephanie was aware of such. So there's kind of a little bit more confirmation that Stephanie was aware of the investigation prior to her taking a leave of absence. Sean Ross Sapp went on to continue stating that, to expand on that, another situation that was clarified was Business Insider saying that WWE head of global sales and partnerships Claudine Lillian was, quote, leaving WWE, unquote. We were able to confirm that she was let go and wasn't looked upon as a great hire by McMahon. We were told that there were plenty of areas of improvement in that department, such as selling sponsors on a much more broad, long-term basis instead of a single show basis. Stephanie is interim CEO as Vince McMahon has stepped down while investigation into alleged misconduct takes place. This article first appeared on their premium service, Fightful Select, and he goes on to state how you can sign up for their select service, and there's various tiers, I believe, there as well, so definitely check that out again. But that's just kind of a little bit of a full circle on things that I know I have kind of touched on, at least probably especially when on Friday's show, I believe it was, when we addressed the whole Vince McMahon stepping back and Stephanie McMahon stepping up situation. Look, we probably will never know the true 100% story of why she took a leave of absence, and I mean, I guess we know now why she was obviously brought back so quickly after that, but I think it's pretty telling as well to see that people on Nick Khan's regime and his team were quick to note specific performance issues and areas of improvement, whereas people who had been around for the majority of the tenure there and much longer than that specific regime noted that there were really no issues, and it was more of Stephanie's decision making on her own. So again, a lot of it's just hearsay and just kind of depending on the source that you're going to, you're probably going to hear what they want you to hear type of thing, which is shitty. And again, not discrediting anyone at all, but it's just, we don't really know until we know type of thing, you know what I mean? Which kind of sucks for all of us who want to sit here and talk about it and speculate on it. So I guess in one way, this is a good kind of follow-up to that, but in a lot of ways, it kind of lends you to more questions too. So I guess right now, guys, we're kind of just stuck in limbo and stuck waiting to really get a full opinion made, or to kind of at least establish a little bit more of an opinion, at least on my side, until we have a little bit more information. And part of me wants more information, and part of me doesn't want more information, so it's just kind of a weird cluster at this point. But moving on after that, we of course have the other big story coming from WWE right now, and that is regarding Sasha Banks herself, obviously. Raj Giri on Twitter at the Raj Giri, which is RAJGIRI, had first reported on Wednesday, June 15th that, quote, "I'm hearing Sasha Banks has been released. I don't know if it's he," which he meant she, "requested it, or if it's on WWE's end," unquote. And he didn't, I'm going to double check and see if he released any more information after that specifically on that tweet. No, I don't see any follow-up after that specifically. But of course that did lead to Sean Ross Sapp, which again is one of my go-tos, obviously. He quote tweeted that same day later on that evening at, ironically, 11:11 p.m. Wonder if you noticed that. But he quote tweeted that saying, quote, "I spoke with Raj this afternoon and asked WWE about this. As of this evening, they said they hadn't heard that and talent relations didn't seem to know. Not saying that it didn't or it isn't happening, but this is what I've heard so far when I asked. Raj has good sources," unquote. So definitely not Sean throwing shade or anything like that, and it's obvious they have been speaking about that prior to him releasing that tweet. But that was all of the information really that Sean had reported at that point. We haven't really received any more information since then of substantial concrete evidence, at least in that regard, but it seems to be that every news source that has been reporting anything regarding Sasha Banks, especially since Raj released that tweet on Wednesday, is pretty much backing up his reporting that she either has been released already or is pretty much on the brinks of being released. And some have even reported that her lawyers have, and again, there's various reports in this in particular as well. Some have reported that her lawyers have already taken care of it as many as 3 weeks ago, or right around the time she originally left Raw, like within that same week, it was already taken care of. So that is one report, and the other one is just stating that her lawyers have been working on it since then, and they're, like I said, on the brink of getting that confirmed and getting that pretty much done and over with. I am not going to really put my head on anything until WWE themselves release a statement, and that is Mainly because obviously there's been so much back and forth with this in and of itself as well. And it's kind of interesting too that I'll point out that we haven't really heard much about Naomi since then. She's been a little bit more active on social media in regards to specifically like Twitter. Not obviously in regards to this, because that'd be more newsworthy than me just kind of passe bringing it up. But she hasn't, in regards to whether she's going to stay or go, her contract disputes, anything of that nature, she's kind of been quieter in that regards, whereas it's almost a for sure thing that Sasha is done with WWE, and it's just a matter of what day is the news going to be released. So, and that's a big deal because that'll, especially if her lawyers are involved in this, which I'm sure that they will be if she's going to be released prior to the expiration of her contract. Unless it is WWE completely on their side, just being okay with firing her, essentially. But I don't see that happening. So if the reports are true that her lawyers have or are involved in this, I would definitely not be surprised. But just in that, and I would, side note, if I was a lawyer and one of Sasha's lawyers, just in with the sole and original purpose of going into this just to kind of get her out of her contract now. If I was reviewing that contract, first of all, I'd be probably fucking fascinated, but I would be kind of scratching my head at the very least, most likely, and saying, first of all, how is something like this legal? And second of all, like, why would you sign that? And again, look, I say that, and I'm sure if I was presented a contract, unless it was something stating that I had to cut off, like, my left arm or something crazy like that, or give up my firstborn, then, I mean, I'm not going to say I wouldn't sign it, because that's the dream, right? If you love this business and you want to be involved in the wrestling business, that used to always be the pinnacle, and that was the end point, and that was it, you know? So, I mean, a lot has changed in the recent years, but that's still the A1 Day One. That's still the big deal, right? That's still, I don't know, it say what you want about WWE and things like WrestleMania and shit like that, but that's still the big leagues, you know what I mean? So that still is out there, and you, regardless of what's going on right now, you can't diminish or take anything away from that. Now, granted, you can say regarding the product and how hot and how popular it's been, it's a completely different subject, but that name value and that brand itself is just growing and growing, especially in worth. But again, that's a whole other subject in and of itself. But long story short, if her lawyers have found a way to get her out of this contract, and let's just say she's going to be released relatively soon, right? Or if she already is, then seeing a free Sasha Banks is going to be fascinating. And to think that she's been tied up with WWE since 2012 is insane. To think that she spent 10 years of her life in WWE, and she's only 30 years old, and the star that she is right now, and the presence that she carries already, the sky's the limit for her, and then some. So I think that too is why we all are so fascinated and so like jumping at every little thing that we can regarding any type of news on her contract, because we want to see what the next step is for Sasha. And I think, look, even if all this shit wasn't happening, with all this negative shit wasn't happening with her in WWE right now, I wouldn't blame her for just wanting to maybe take a break from WWE for no other reason, just to see what else is out there. Like, especially when you realize, and I didn't even realize it until I did a little research on what's going on with her right now, that she's been there for 10 years. When I was talking about her, I believe on one of the other shows, I mentioned her NXT career, or I'm sorry, maybe that was Paige. But at least for Sasha, there's been so much shit that's happened. But at least for Sasha, to think that she's been there for 10 years, since 2012, and to see how much she's obviously grown, right? I mean, 10 fucking years. Who doesn't grow in 10 years? But especially at those critical years in your life, right? To go from 20 to 30 and to still be so young and have so much ahead of you and so many different paths. Like, she doesn't even have to stay in wrestling. And that's what us fans need to maybe not be worried about, because we can still enjoy her and watch her grow and be a fan of hers, and for instance, Hollywood or whatever she does next. But I think we obviously, and I would be shocked more so, if more so than anything, to see her just kind of take a step back from wrestling, completely at least. I definitely would see her going into Hollywood or whatever, but if she doesn't wrestle at all for the next like 3 to 5 years, I would be very surprised. So I hope she does, for at least for our sake, continue to stay in the wrestling business. But even if she doesn't, if she does take 3 to 5 years off, she'll be 35, right? So she still will be fucking insane and damn near in her prime, probably still. Sasha has that just God-given natural ability and just charisma and talent that I don't even know if she would get ring rushed, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure she would obviously have to get back into ring shape because they say, which I'm completely certain is true, that there's a difference between being in shape and being in ring shape. So I'm sure she would obviously have to go through the motions to get back into the swing of things in that respect. But she just seems like that type of competitor and that type of athlete and the type of talent that loves this business so much that she could take however many years away that she needed to from the business and then get right back into it. So I wouldn't have any fear in that regard, but just again, WWE especially is going through a weird fucking time in 2022, but in my opinion, and I can't believe I would be saying this going into this year, but I hope they do release her, and I hope she is free, and I hope for herself and for her and her family that they're happy with whatever the outcome is with this, and that's truly what everyone involved, especially her, they want, and she does what she wants to do after this, and we get to see what Mercedes Varnado does, so definitely excited for that. But moving on, one last thing in the WWE world before we head on over to AEW. I saw somewhere, was it? I don't know, somewhere that someone had called it the AEW Galaxy, and that just fucking tickled me. The WWE Universe and then AEW Galaxy. It's just so fucking great. Maybe, was it Chris Jericho? I don't even remember where I heard it from now. I'm kind of losing my mind. But moving on, guys. Randy Orton is the another big talking point, or maybe not as big as everything else, which is he's probably enjoying right now. But it is almost confirmed that he obviously has a back injury and is going to need surgery, which Riddle kind of confirmed that on SmackDown for kind of referencing that operation, obviously. It doesn't take a rocket science to put two and two together there. But their main fear is that will put him out for the remainder of 2022, which would be huge, right? And depending on what his return table could be, it's weird because with my scenario for Cody Rhodes' return, I pegged him to come back at the Rumble, kind of win that, and then go on from there. But if you're going to have Randy Orton return right around that time frame as well, I don't think you need Randy in the Rumble. I think you can have him return maybe at the Raw after the Rumble or right around then. And I think what you can do in the meantime is kind of, and obviously, look, Randy Orton was one of the top baby faces in the company before he left, if not the top. So to think of the reaction he was getting, multiplying that times, 5, 10, when he returns is going to be insane, regardless of where that is. But I say that because I think you kind of have a layup in that regard. And I say you don't need Randy Orton in the Royal Rumble because of what that means for Riddle. So, hear me out, guys. What you can do is, and to me, for whatever reason, it kind of stood out more so on SmackDown than the weeks prior. But if anything, his promo segment on SmackDown, Riddle's that is, kind of tied everything together in my brain. And I think you can kind of take Riddle on if you guys have been long-term wrestling fans at this point, which is crazy to think how long ago it's been. But when Mickie James was making her debut in WWE, and she was kind of obsessed, or maybe take kind of out, she was obsessed with Trish Stratus, right? Like, she was Trish Stratus' #1 fan. She wanted to be Trish Stratus, essentially. She had pictures of her everywhere. I think at one point she even had, like, candles in a circle, almost like a seance. For Trish, like, it was this whole thing, and then it culminated at WrestleMania 22 in a fucking fantastic women's match, which, by the way, if you guys haven't seen WrestleMania 22 at all, or if you haven't seen it in a while, you should do yourself a favor, I know I say that a lot, and check it out. It's just a great pay-per-view, and I think really underrated. It's that, you had the Shawn Michaels versus Vince McMahon. It was like either like a street fight or essentially no rules, and Shawn Michaels does this incredible elbow drop off of this insane ladder. And just to see all the shit that Vince does in matches and what he would put himself through is just ridiculous. You had that match, and then you obviously had John Cena later on. I believe he was facing off against Triple H, if I'm not mistaken. But the thing that always stands out to me when I rewatch WrestleMania 22, not to go on a too long of a tangent here, is when you see the Street Gang kind of driving or hanging off the side of the cars with the little guns. Obviously, they were in Chicago, so they were playing off of just whatever history at that point after the video package had aired. But CM Punk is hanging off of one of the cars there, and it's just kind of fun to see the culmination and the full circle in that regard. But moving on, guys, back to the original point here. With Randy Orton, like I said, you don't need to have him at the Rumble. You can have Riddle kind of continue to go on this weird obsession with Randy, and obviously not get to the point of Mickie James, but maybe borderline, and have people saying like, okay, and have like some of the backstage announcers, for instance, start pointing it out, like saying, oh, like, okay, Riddle, like we get it, we all miss Randy too, but are you focused for tonight's match, whatever it may be? And Riddle would be like, yeah, bro, like, I'm not concerned, blah, 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 regardless of who it's against. And I'm dedicating it to my boy Randy at home, and just always just have him bring it back to Randy and kind of get him more and more offended when people start to question him on his love for Randy and why he keeps bringing Randy up and all this stuff, and just kind of set him up to show that, okay, like maybe Riddle does have not necessarily a dark side, but more of a vicious side to him. And in that way, so when Randy does return, it's not going to be as shocking, or as, maybe not shocking, because that's probably what you want, obviously, but as unbelievable, rather, or as hard to, I guess that defeats the purpose. But just sticking with unbelievable here. With the idea of Riddle himself actually turning, right? Because that's what we were all kind of thinking was going to happen. It got to a point where Randy was just so loved that it would almost be beyond stupid for WWE to have Randy turn on Riddle. So we were all fearing that Riddle was going to turn on Orton anyway, and it was going to feel forced. This way, I don't feel like it will. You have a long time, obviously, if he is, in fact, going to be out the remaining portion of this year, you have at least, 6 months or so, at the very least. And again, shout out to Randy. I hope everything does go well. If he obviously does have to get that operation. We still don't know exactly what the nature of the back injury is, but that's got to suck. It's not like a leg injury or arm injury where it's just one limb, right? It's the back, which is probably more inconvenient than we all even imagine. So shout out to Randy, and I hope he heals very expeditiously. And again, I don't mean that in a negative way, but here we go. I think you can have it leading up to, and I'm torn on the Royal Rumble, but I just don't feel like Randy needs to make his return in the Rumble match itself, right? So I just feel like that kind of defeats the purpose, because it's just not meant for Randy this year. It's just not needed, in my opinion. So that's why I feel like you just kind of leave that for Cody and let him do his thing, and you can have Randy return after the Rumble type of thing, because if you return him before the Rumble, it's going to be kind of obvious, like, he should be in the Rumble match, and then if that's the case, then you should have had him return the Rumble. So obviously, in my opinion, that's not really, it doesn't really benefit or work out in the best way. So have him return, and ideally at the Rumble, the Raw after the Rumble, and then you can have Riddle kind of, I mean, at first you're gonna want to have Riddle to be super excited that he's back, right? You can even have it announced to get this big hype, to get a ratings draw, all that good stuff. Whether you want to announce it or have it as a surprise, it depends on the nature of the return and the location of the return, in my opinion. But regardless, that's kind of getting the nitty gritty. You can have, obviously, Orton return, Riddle be super excited he's back. But within a week or two, you start to notice some cracks in Riddle, and that he's maybe a little bit jealous that Randy is getting so much love and so much attention, and that Riddle's been kind of holding down the fort for the past however many months, but Randy Orton is the one getting all the love and the respect, and maybe even a title shot at that point, or whatever you want to do, and just have Riddle be more and more jealous, and then get to a point where Riddle snaps and just either attacks Randy backstage or costs him said title shot, and kind of sets up the path for a heel Riddle going into WrestleMania. And I think that would be a fun, culmination of their long storied history together. I was gonna say feud, but that's obviously not the right word. But their long history together, right? And I think this went longer than a lot of us originally anticipated. And shout out to Randy and Riddle and everyone involved for that. And I think the writing team who has coordinated this week to week, and whoever was involved in this, they, we give them a lot of shit, but they deserve some kudos in this respect too. And I mean, look, not a lot of people can pull off what Riddle has put off, but so he deserves, and Randy Orton, they deserve the bulk of the credit there. But again, they're not obviously coming up with everything themselves, even if maybe they should be, which is not the point here. But again, just shout out to everyone involved, and I hope, as we all do, Randy Orton has a good recovery and we see him when we see him. But moving on to the AEW Galaxy, as referenced earlier, we have some good news if you are living in the Minnesota area. AEW has announced that they're returning to the Target Center in, obviously, Minnesota, August 10th of this year for the Quake by the Lake show, which seems to be a new themed show that AEW is unveiling. So shout out to everyone in the Minnesota area. If you were in Minnesota this past Friday, you were there for a pretty monumental and breaking news story there as well. So, and I mentioned earlier that so I guess before we get into AEW, but because I was just thinking about it as well, and we're obviously going to end with AEW, so I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of circle back to the whole Brock Lesnar thing from this past Friday. But look, guys, just to keep it really brief here, because there's a lot that I can say on this, but it's not good for anyone's health and blood pressure, right? I just think it's asinine. I think it's ridiculous that we are going back to Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns again for the 9th time, or at least we've already seen them for 9 matches. Either they've already had 9 matches previously, or SummerSlam is going to be their 9th match. Regardless, that's fucking insane, right? Like, whether it has been since 2015 or not, like, that's insane. Like, there's no excuse for it. A lot of people have made the excuse that is essentially for right now that, with Randy Orton going out, with Cody Rhodes being out, X, Y, and Z, there was really no other option. That's bullshit. You have a lot of options there. You just have Bobby Lashley signaling that he wants to be the champion, and he literally just finished his feud with Omos. He's pretty much in a bullshit feud with Theory right now. That's just kind of holding water until John Cena returns next Monday. So I really think that was unnecessary to bring Brock Lesnar back, and I think it was way too soon. I think that it's a waste of Brock Lesnar's star power, for one. It would have been a nice one-off, especially with him being from Minnesota. That would have made sense. And okay, fine, you want to give the fans something special there, cool. But to immediately announce a last man standing match at SummerSlam between the two of them, for both titles as well, mind you, is just kind of ludicrous to me. And it shows that we're probably not going to get much of a story out of this, because they've already made the match itself. They already have the stipulation, so it's not like the weeks building up to it is going to determine the stipulation itself. How many fucking contract signings have we seen between the two of them? What point does it even really make at this point, because the match is already set? So it just makes no sense to me, and it's an easy way out, and I don't want to hear that there was no other option. You have Bobby Lashley right there. You could have done something with AJ Styles. Roman Reigns is the Raw and SmackDown champion, right? He's the WWE champion and the Universal champion, which means he is the champion of both shows. So he has the ability to travel from show to show, and technically should be on on each show, right? So the fact that he's not, and the fact that we just now saw him defend his title for the first time, is rather insane to me as well. And again, nothing against him. They negotiated and they agreed to this contract, and good for him, He has more time home with his family, and kudos to him for that. He was smart in that regards, and I'm not saying I wouldn't have done anything differently if I wasn't in his position, right? But the fact that he has both of your championships, and you have a lot of holes on for instance, Monday Night Raw, especially with Cody Rhodes being out and things like that, like, I don't know. I don't see why you go right back to Brock Lesnar, because it's not like Brock is going to be on every show between now and SummerSlam. So I don't know. I try not to be so negative, but this was just a easy way out. And you're pretty much, it's almost like a WrestleMania part three, night three type thing at SummerSlam for what it's shaping up to be so far. So we are getting the return of John Cena, like I mentioned, next week on Raw. So that will probably set up his match with Theory at SummerSlam. So we'll start the build for that. But again, that's why I was saying there's no reason that Bobby Lashley wouldn't have been free and have been able to start the build with Roman Reigns for his match at SummerSlam. Not saying that he necessarily would have won against Roman Reigns, and that's a whole other topic. But I don't know. I feel like the Brock Lesnar thing it's just not even exciting to me. So let me know what you guys think on Twitter, as always. But I don't know, guys. I'm not here for this one. But okay, guys, officially back into the AEW galaxy. I will just revisit the original topic before I went off on my Brock Lesnar tirade. AEW again is returning to the Target Center in Minneapolis on August 10th for the Quake by the Lake show, which appears to be a new theme show that AEW is building and debuting there. So it'll be cool to see what that actually is about and what the idea is going to be surrounding that. This past week on AEW Dynamite, it was the Road Rager version of the show itself, which I love the color scheme and just the look of the show, which was for that the Road Rager theme. It's just pretty cool. The purple, blue, white type of vibe. It's just pretty cool. So that's why I'm very curious to see what the Quake by the Lake ends up looking like and what kind of design they go with. But Dynamite started with Chris Jericho versus Ortiz in the hair versus hair match. The crowd was very animated during pretty much the entirety of the show, and this match was no different. It actually was a very good match too, so shout out to both guys involved. There was a lot of interference towards the end of the match, which the referee didn't see, and no one ended up getting disqualified for, but it did lead to a Chris Jericho victory here. And Ortiz, instead of having the dude who was apparently hired to shave his head, instead of allowing him to do the honors, Ortiz took the shaver thing. I can't think of the name of it. Been a long day, guys. The hair clippers, whatever. Obviously the scissors. He cut off some of the long braids that he had, but he took the clippers to his head after that, and Eddie Kingston was in the ring with him as well and was holding a microphone and talking shit and held the mic so Ortiz can say blood and guts repeatedly. And he had actually nicked himself with the clippers at one point, so a little bit of blood was trickling down his face, which was pretty perfect. And he looked like a crazy dude, so it was a very good ending visual for that segment itself. After that, we had the Wardlow versus the 20-man security guard match on the the class action lawsuit case, and the ring announcer who was there, Dasha. I don't know if she has a last name. I don't remember. I know her name is Dasha. Sorry about that, but Dasha, she does a lot of the AEW dark tapings as well. But I guess Justin Roberts had the night off, so shout out to him for having the night off. Hope everything's good. But it was funny during the eliminations of the match, she would reference, like, it was like security guard number 1, 2, and 3 or whatever it was. So that was a pretty fun little inclusion of the match itself. But Wardlow obviously dominated, nothing much to this match. It kind of was what it was. If you really thought that Wardlow had any chance of losing here, I'm not sure if you're new to wrestling. If you are, then hey, welcome. We all start somewhere. I get it, and I'm jealous of your innocence. But there was no chance in Wardlow losing here, so it was what it was. But after that, we had Dax Harwood versus Will Ospreay making his singles match debut in AEW. This match was obviously the match of the night, no question about that. And it's amazing to see what Dax has continuously done as a singles competitor throughout the weeks, especially in the various tournaments that he's been in, like the Owen Hart tournament itself. It's just the match he had against CM Punk. He's kind of been a standout in a lot of ways. So between his singles work and the work that he's done, obviously in FTR, dude's had a poster year. So shout out to Dax. And again, I mean, Will Ospreay, I mean, what can you say about Will Ospreay, right? Like, he's just fucking incredible. So the fact that we finally got him here in AEW and they lined him up with Hardwood for his first singles match, I think that was a perfect pairing. And to be honest, not one that I really would have thought about or pegged, before seeing it on paper. And even seeing it on paper, I was kind of like, why would you necessarily go with that pairing? And not because obviously I don't like Dax. I fucking love I was gonna say HTR, Hill to the Redskins, right? FTR. Obviously we love them as a tag team, and like I just gushed over Dax for his singles in-ring work lately, but I didn't think about it, right? So after really putting some thought into it and seeing what these guys came up with in-ring wise, it was just fucking amazing, and they just stole the show in my opinion. So if you only have limited time in your evening and you have Dynamite saved, I would go back and watch this match, because this was just incredible. And the fact that we got it on free TV was just extra icing on that cake, right? Right after that, we got Jon Moxley and Hiroshi Tanahashi for their in-ring segment for the first time, face-to-face, which was a big deal. If you have followed Moxley's New Japan career and journey, and the fact that he has essentially wanted to face off against Tanahashi for about 3 years now, the journey and the long-term story booking, even though it hasn't really been necessarily by TonyCon, obviously, it's just the cards just kind of fell into play in that regard. It was just cool seeing them finally face to face. And again, I'm not going to obviously sit here and pretend like I'm the biggest New Japan fan and I know everything about New Japan. I'm still learning about their history and learning about all the different wrestlers and everything like that. But I do know that they have been trying to get to each other for quite some time, and obviously the pandemic had a big play into that. But the fact that this is the go home week too for Forbidden Door, and I think this week's Dynamite is obviously gonna have to solidify a lot leading into the pay-per-view itself, because and thinking about it too, it kind of doesn't even feel like this is the go home week going into the pay-per-view, which I don't remember necessarily ever saying about an AEW pay-per-view. But yeah, it's just kind of weird as I'm sitting here really realizing that, oh shit, like the pay-per-view is this coming Sunday. So it's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing on Dynamite to kind of lay out the remaining portions of the card itself. But the face-to-face that Moxley and Tanahashi had was just cool to see, and a cool moment if you're a longtime New Japan fan. Moxley pretty much did the majority of the talking here because Tanahashi doesn't really know English that well, so he didn't really even say anything at all. And right before he went to speak, Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara interrupted from the stage along with Ty Conti later on as well. And the rest of the Appreciation Society came down and beat down both Moxley and Tanahashi, which later brought out Lance Archer and Desperado from Suzuki Gun. So a lot of not interference, but a lot of things that play here, which obviously set up a match for next week, which we'll get to after we run down the rest of the card here. But it was a fine segment, and it was cool. It shows that both guys are still technically good guys, right? But they want to beat the shit out of each other, which is what wrestling essentially not should be, because you should have your good guys and your bad guys, but what wrestling could be in one of these cool little matches that you don't necessarily have to have a bad guy here. It's just for the love of wrestling. So I really, really loved and enjoyed this segment. But the next match that we had was another All-Atlantic tournament match between Miro and Ethan Page. Match here was actually really good, and I'm becoming more and more of an Ethan Page fan. Obviously, he's really good on the mic, and I think he is one of the victims to a little bit of overcrowding, at least for talent on TV-wise, that AEW is kind of dealing with. But man, when he gets his opportunity either on the mic or in the ring, like, dude just capitalizes and shines. And obviously, you guys know my love for Miro, so I would sit here and waste an hour if I could talking about Miro and how amazing he is and just how fucking great it is to have him back too. So I think obviously there's no real surprise here that he ended up getting the victory, and I think should win the tournament without really thinking too much into it. I just think that Miro deserves a title. Or I'm not going to say deserves a title because a lot of people deserve titles, right? And that's not really necessarily the main idea in wrestling, right? But Miro should be a champion, and I think he's a good champion, and I think he could really get the most use out of being that champion and really put a good foundation for what they want a championship to mean in AEW. So I think he would be a good first choice in that regard, at least. Right after that, we had Toni Storm versus Britt Baker, and this was a very good match too. And it was about time that we finally got this match, in my opinion. We all have been waiting for it, and I think just to kind of wrap it up here shortly, guys. I think that it was good to have Toni Storm get the victory here, and I think that Britt really lost nothing with losing here, which shows how much of a star she is, and rightfully so. But I think it really did a lot for Toni Storm here, and it really solidified her journey to the title, and it really just kind of gave her more momentum, as much as we hate that word, going into her title match against Thunder Rosa at Forbidden Door. So that, and I am happy that they ended up getting a women's match on the Forbidden Door pay-per-view itself. So, and I think that would be a very, very good match, to say the least. So after that, the main event itself was the Young Bucks versus Jurassic Express for the AEW Tag Team titles in the ladder match. Of course, we were originally slated to have the Hardys in there as well, but sadly with Jeff Hardy's DUI arrest, they were pulled from the match, so it ended up just being a regular tag team match. Not even going to try to explain this match to you guys. This is another one of those matches where you definitely just need to go out and watch for yourselves. But I will say that the two main things here, the correct team won, in my opinion, and that being the Young Bucks. Now, they are the first ever two-time AEW Tag Team Champions, which is a cool thing to think about, and I think that they are the perfect guys to kind of hold that honor and to be the tag team champions right now, especially with the impending thought that it's going to lead to an FTR versus Young Bucks match, which probably you could do it all out at this point, and I think you should have FTR go over if that is what the match is going to be. Just because the FTR is so hot right now, and I think that AEW tag titles are the only ones that are really eluding them right now. So just to see FTR draped with all the tag team titles from various promotions, I just think that visual alone is going to be beautiful. But for them as a team, like that, they deserve it, right? And I hate to keep going back to that word, but their characters deserve it at this point, right? Like, it just all makes sense, and the path and the journey has just led to that, in my opinion. So I think it was the perfect idea going with the Young Bucks here in that regard, and then it set up what in my opinion was kind of a little long overdue, but it was about time, having Christian turn on Jungle Boy, and essentially, well, I guess hasn't been confirmed, but at least on Jungle Boy at the end, he chucked on Luchasaurus outside of the ring, who had just taken that plunge off the top of the ladder through about 4 tables on the outside. He went into the ring to check on Jungle Boy, said maybe a few things to him, and then betrayed him. And all the little girls in the audience were devastated, right? No, but it was very well done. He ended up hitting the concerto because, of course. And what was even a better touch, they had Jungle Boy's sister and mother at ringside. They didn't air this on TV, probably because they ran out of time, but I believe it was on, if not their own Twitter page, but a fan had tweeted it as well. And I'm pretty certain AEW did also, but Christian Cage's interaction with Jungle Boy's family, his mom and his sister, pretty much he called them a piece of shit, they called him a piece of shit. It was great. You love to see it. And I think Christian as a heel is just perfect. I think that is long overdue. And I just think that the story going forward between Christian and Jungle Boy is just, it's going to be great. And I think that it's almost like a perfect pairing for the veteran and Christian in his position with his in-ring skills and ability and his combined with his promo. To kind of just be the foil for Jungle Boy and to really help Jungle Boy grow in ring. Not as much is needed. I mean, he definitely does need to improve. Who doesn't need to improve, right? Everyone is improving in everything. But more so in his promo, and to kind of, like I said, be the foil for him to play off of. And obviously that they've built that rapport with each other and that bond and friendship with each other. So it's going to be more comfortable and easier for him to kind of play off of. So I think that was just so well done. It was just very, very well done, and like I was stating, kind of long overdue. But the card for next week's Dynamite has officially been released. We have Jon Moxley teaming with Tanahashi to face on Jericho and Archer, which is insane to think that we're going to get Mox and Tanahashi on Dynamite teaming together. So that is a reason to to Dynamite in and of itself. We have the next qualifier match in the All-Atlantic Championship Tournament, which is Penta versus Malachi Black. I mean, take my money right there. You also have Orange Cassidy with Roppongi Vice teaming up against Will Ospreay in the Aussie Open. I mean, that right there, guys, is just fucking insane. And like I said, this is the go-home show, or the go-home Dynamite for Forbidden Door, so I'm sure we'll get a lot more added to it, or at least, obviously, we'll have more in the show itself. But thank you guys so much for listening. We have made it through another week in this crazy, crazy, crazy world. I can't even imagine what this next week is going to bring for us, guys. So thank you, as always, for tuning in and keeping this show in your feed. It's truly, truly appreciated. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and we'll talk soon.